My name is Vivienne Holt. I am 44 years old. May 15th, 2025, 10:31 in the morning. The atrium of Raleigh General Hospital, Beckley, West Virginia. I am standing at the podium with my notes in front of me, though I will not need them. The room holds 73 people. The mayor is in the front row. 3 local news cameras are positioned along the left wall. The full nursing staff of the new wing is standing shoulder to shoulder along the far wall in their scrubs, and some of them are already crying, which I find quietly wonderful. The hospital's CEO is seated to my right. My foundation's board members are in the second row. The brass lettering on the wall to the left of the atrium entrance is polished to a soft glow. I can see it from where I stand. At 10:47 in the morning, 16 minutes after I took the podium, the atrium doors open. A man in his early 70s walks in wearing a button-down shirt that has been pressed carefully. The woman beside him is holding a small clutch bag with both hands. The hospital's director of development greets them near the entrance. She hands them each a program. I watch from the podium without moving my expression. I watch the man take the program. I watch him read it. I watch him look up at the wall. I watch his face do something I have waited 22 years to see. Not because I needed it, but because some moments simply arrive, and you let them. What he didn't know, what he had never once considered, was that his daughter was not a floor nurse somewhere in Ohio. She was the keynote speaker. She was the foundation chair. She was, as the CEO would announce in approximately 9 minutes, the single largest individual donor in this hospital's 112-year history. This is that story. Before I tell you what happened when my father read that program and looked up at those brass letters on the wall, I want to pause for just a moment. If you are watching this right now, I would love to know where you are. Drop your location and your local time in the comments below, and if this story is already speaking to something you have lived, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Every one of you watching from a small town, from a house where someone told you that you were too much or not enough, I am speaking directly to you. Now, let me take you back to the beginning, to a parking lot in Beckley, West Virginia, in the winter of 2003, where a 22-year-old girl sat holding a phone and learned, from a stranger, what her father had decided about her future. I grew up on Crestview Drive in Beckley, West Virginia, in a white 4-bedroom house with green shutters and a concrete front porch that my father pressure washed every April. The yard was immaculate. The truck was washed every Sunday. From the outside, the Holt house looked like discipline and order and a certain kind of American pride. My father, Douglas Holt, had worked the factory floor at a manufacturing plant outside of town for 23 years. He was 51 years old when this story begins. He wore the same brown work boots from September through May and kept his hair cut short every 3 weeks at the same barber on Harper Road. He was not a lazy man. He was not a careless man. He was precise and consistent in almost everything he did. That precision is part of why what he did to me hurt the way it did. He chose it deliberately. He executed it cleanly. And he never once looked back. My mother, Loretta Holt, was 48 that year. She worked part-time at the office of First Baptist Church 3 mornings a week, answered phones, filed papers, brought casseroles to families after funerals. She was soft-spoken and warm to anyone who needed warmth, which is why the specific coldness she reserved for standing aside when I needed her still lives in a particular corner of my memory. She was not cruel. That is the hardest thing to hold about my mother. She was never cruel to me. She simply elected, every single time, to keep the peace rather than keep her daughter. She deferred to Douglas on everything and called it harmony. I called it something else, quietly to myself. I was the second of 3 children. My brother Garrett was 3 years older than me, and my younger sister Paula was born when I was 5. Garrett worked a landscaping route after high school and eventually took over the business from his employer. Paula married at 23 and moved 40 minutes down the road. We were not a close family in the way people use that word warmly. We were a present family. We showed up for dinners. We passed the potatoes. We did not discuss things that mattered. I had wanted to be a nurse since I was 14 years old. I had told my parents this. I had told them repeatedly, plainly, and without drama, the way I did most things. My high school grades were good. My SAT scores were good. I applied to the nursing program at West Virginia University, and I was accepted in the spring of 2003. I was 22 years old. I had taken a gap year to work and save after high school, and I had started my application late, but I had gotten in. I remember pulling the acceptance letter out of the mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon in April and sitting on the front porch and reading it twice and feeling something lift off my chest that I had not known was there. That night at dinner, I put the letter on the table beside my father's plate. He finished chewing before he picked it up. He read it the way he read utility bills, scanning, expressionless, looking for the number that mattered. Then he set it back down and said, without looking up from his plate, "We're not spending good money so you can wipe strangers." My mother looked at her hands. Paula reached for the salt shaker. Garrett kept eating. I folded the letter back into the envelope and I went to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed and I made a decision, very quietly, that I would not ask him again. There had been a verbal agreement. Nothing written, nothing formal, but a clear and acknowledged promise that Douglas and Loretta would contribute $6,400 toward my first year of tuition. That number had been said aloud in this house more than once. I had built my plans around it. I had calculated my loans around it. I had structured everything around that one given. 3 weeks before the semester was set to begin, in February of 2003, I was at work at the Mountain View Diner, clearing a table during the late afternoon lull when my phone rang. It was the financial aid office at WVU. A woman named Sandra told me, in the polite and practiced tone of someone who delivers this kind of news more often than she should, that my account balance had a remaining unpaid amount of $6,400 and that if it was not resolved within 14 days, my enrollment would be deferred. I thanked her. I told her I would call back. I stood in the side hallway between the kitchen and the dining room for a moment, holding the phone against my collarbone, and then I walked to the back, told my manager I needed 10 minutes, went out to the parking lot, sat down on the curb next to a dumpster, and I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. She already knew. I could tell by the half-second of silence before she said hello. She told me that your father made a decision, Vivienne, and that the timing just wasn't right, and that maybe next year would be better. I asked her what he had spent the money on. She paused. Then she said he had put a deposit down on a fishing boat he had been looking at for a couple of years, and that it was something he had really wanted. I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, "Okay, Mom." I did not cry. I did not scream. I sat on that curb with my work apron still on, and I looked at the parking lot and I made the second quiet decision of my life. The first had been that I would not ask my father for his approval. The second was that I would not need his money. I want to stop here for a moment because I know some of you watching right now are sitting with something heavy, and I want you to know that I see you. If you are in the middle of your own quiet build, working your double shifts, keeping your secret, moving through the years when nobody is watching and nobody is clapping, please subscribe to this channel and leave a comment below telling me where you are in your story. We built this community for you. Every single one of you who is building something in silence deserves to know that there are other women doing the same thing and that the room you are working toward is real. I went back inside, finished my shift, and the next morning I called the financial aid office and Sandra and I sorted out what I needed to do. I signed for additional loans. I picked up a second job as a hospital aide 3 mornings a week at a clinic on the east side of Beckley. I kept my shifts at the diner. I slept 6 hours a night and sometimes 5. By September of 2003, I was enrolled at WVU. By December, I had not quit. I remember thinking about what my father had said to my mother. She'll quit by Christmas. Girls like her always do. I counted the days. December 25th came and went. I was in my apartment studying for my pharmacology exam with a cup of cold coffee and a highlighted textbook. I thought about that sentence. I counted the words in it. 7 words that cost him nothing and were intended to cost me everything. I wrote them in the margin of my notebook, and then I kept studying. I graduated in May of 2007. My parents attended because my Aunt Christine, my mother's older sister, had told my mother it would look terrible if they did not come, and Loretta always cared about how things looked. They sat in the 3rd row. I walked across the stage. I collected my degree. I found them afterward in the grass outside the auditorium. My father shook my hand. Not a hug. A handshake the way you might congratulate a colleague you barely know. He looked at my diploma the way he had looked at my acceptance letter, and he said to my mother, loud enough for 3 people nearby to hear, "I still don't see what this proves." My Aunt Christine looked at him. I did not. I thanked them both for coming, I hugged my aunt, and I drove home to my apartment, and I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat by the window for a long time. I felt something that was not quite sadness and not quite anger. It was closer to clarity. I understood, that night, who my father was. And I understood with the same stillness that his assessment of me had never been accurate. It had only ever been a reflection of how small his imagination was. I started working as a floor nurse at Charleston Area Medical Center in the summer of 2007. I earned $38,000 my first year. I lived carefully. I put $700 a month into savings and I never touched it. I pursued my BSN through an online program while working full-time, and I earned it in 2010. I went straight into my MSN. By 2012, I had it. By then I was earning $61,000 a year as a charge nurse, and the hospital staffing coordinator had started asking me informally to help her think through scheduling models for high census periods. I was good at it. I had a particular ability to see systems, to understand how the pieces of a complex operation fit together and where they were grinding against each other unnecessarily. It turned out that the same mind that had worked double shifts while balancing a pharmacology syllabus was very well suited to consulting. In the spring of 2013, I moved to Columbus, Ohio. I was 32 years old. I took a position as a charge nurse at Ohio Health Riverside Methodist Hospital at a salary of $78,000. I had $41,000 in savings. I had a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of Columbus that I rented for $980 a month. I drove a 2009 Honda Accord that I had bought used and paid off in 3 years. This was my life, and it was a good one. But it was also, quietly, a launch pad. I had been consulting informally for 2 staffing agencies in Charleston since 2011, reviewing shift coverage models and recommending restructuring. I had done this on the side, carefully, without making a business of it. But by the summer of 2013, I had 4 agency contacts asking for my time on a regular basis, and the informal arrangement was no longer viable. I spent 4 months that fall reading every resource I could find on business registration, contracts, liability, and consulting structures. In January of 2014, I formally registered Holt Consulting Group LLC in the state of Ohio. I told no one in my family. My father believed I was still a floor nurse somewhere in Ohio, calling dutifully on Christmas and birthdays, unremarkable and contained. I did not correct him. Loretta sent me a Hallmark card every year, the kind with watercolor flowers on the front. Douglas did not write in it. The first year of the consultancy was modest by any measure. I had 3 clients, and I'd brought in $87,000. Half of it went back into the business. A real website, liability insurance, accounting software, a part-time virtual assistant. I paid myself $43,000 and kept my nursing position for 14 more months as a safety net. Every morning I was at my kitchen table by 6, working the consulting accounts before my hospital shift began. I did this for over a year. I did not talk about it at family dinners. I was not yet ready. By December of 2015, I had stepped back from the hospital entirely. The consultancy had grown to 5 clients and was generating $190,000 annually. I had hired a part-time operations assistant, and I had moved into a small office suite on the east side of Columbus. I was 34 years old, and I was building something real. But I want to be honest with you about what this period actually felt like, because it was not triumphant. It was frequently exhausting. It was occasionally frightening. In the spring of 2016, one of my anchor clients, a regional hospital group in Indiana that represented nearly a third of my revenue at the time, told me they were bringing their staffing optimization in-house and terminating our contract. I sat with that phone call for a full evening. I looked at my numbers. I looked at my pipeline. I ran the projections. The numbers were not comfortable. I spent 6 weeks rebuilding my client pipeline from the referral list I had been maintaining since 2013, making calls I had been putting off, writing proposals I had been hesitant about. I replaced that revenue by September. But I want you to understand that there was a Tuesday night in April of 2016 when I sat at my kitchen table with a spreadsheet and a glass of water, and I felt genuinely that I had gone too far out on a limb. That feeling was real. What I did with it was the decision. By December of 2016, the consultancy had 7 hospital clients across Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky, and was generating $340,000 annually. I reinvested nearly everything. I gave myself a salary of $85,000 and put the rest back into operations, staff, and infrastructure. I bought a used 2014 Subaru Outback, and I moved into a better apartment. These were not dramatic changes. They were proportionate ones. That mattered to me. My father, that December, called on Christmas morning as he did every year. He asked how things were going. I told him work was steady and that Columbus was cold. He told me he had gotten new tires on the truck and that Garrett's business was doing well. He did not ask me specifics. He never did. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. When we hung up, I made myself breakfast and I thought, quietly, that there was something almost generous in his incuriosity. It had given me 11 years of building in peace. The years between 2017 and 2019 were the years of consolidation and scale. I added 3 clients in 2017, 4 more in 2018. By mid-2019, I had 19 hospital and healthcare system clients across Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania, and the consultancy was generating $1.1 million annually. I hired my first 2 full-time employees, a senior operations manager named Deborah, who had spent 12 years in hospital administration, and a client relations director named Marcus, who had come out of a regional health system in Cincinnati. Together we were a small but serious operation. I leased a proper office suite in a building on Dublin Granville Road. I had a conference room with a whiteboard and a coffee maker and a view of a parking structure, which, I will be honest, I found deeply satisfying. I was 38 years old. I had built this from a diner parking lot in Beckley with $6,400 worth of spite and a pharmacology textbook. By 2020, I had begun conversations with a private equity group based in Chicago that specialized in healthcare services firms. The discussions were exploratory at first. They had reached out through a mutual contact, and I was not convinced I wanted to sell. I spent 18 months thinking about it. I talked to 3 other founders who had gone through similar transactions. I asked hard questions. I ran scenarios. I ultimately decided that a partial acquisition, one that brought in capital and expanded infrastructure while allowing me to retain a significant stake and a seat at the table, was the right move for where I wanted to take the foundation work I had been planning for years. In March of 2022, I sold 60% of Holt Consulting Group for $2,300,000. I was 41 years old. I retained 40% and an advisory board seat. I cried once, alone, in my car in the parking garage after signing. Then I drove home, made dinner, and sat with the number for a long time. Within 30 days of closing, I established the Holt Family Foundation with an initial endowment of $800,000. The name was deliberate. It was not named for my parents. It was named for the family I intended to build, the one that existed in the future I was working toward, the one built on intention rather than inheritance. The foundation's focus was rural healthcare infrastructure in Appalachia, specifically the underfunded hospital systems in the communities that raised women like me and then told them to stay small. I began donor outreach. I hired a foundation director. I started making calls. The call that mattered most was to the development office at Raleigh General Hospital in Beckley, West Virginia, 8 minutes from my parents' house, the hospital where I had visited a classmate after her appendectomy at 15, and looked at the nurses moving through the corridor and thought, with a certainty I had never felt about anything else, that I wanted to be one of those people. I called them in the late summer of 2022. I told them who I was and what the foundation was building. They called back the next morning. The planning and construction of the outpatient nursing wing took 31 months. There were permits and architects and board approvals and one very difficult conversation about naming rights that I handled in a single meeting with a single slide and a single number. The dedication ceremony was scheduled for May 15, 2025. I arranged for my parents to receive invitations through the hospital's development office, sent by my assistant under the hospital's letterhead, listing the event as a community celebration of the new wing. The invitation did not mention my name. It mentioned a complimentary reception and light refreshments. My father, I knew, would attend anything that described itself as real money going to real people. I had counted on that. I was at the podium by 10:31 in the morning. The atrium was full. The mayor was in the front row. The cameras were positioned and rolling. The brass lettering on the wall to the left of the entrance read, in clean and permanent capital letters, the Vivienne Holt Nursing Win, funded by the Holt Family Foundation, 2020 Mai. I had seen it installed 6 weeks earlier, and had stood in the empty atrium alone and looked at it for a while without speaking. The doors opened at 10:47. I did not look up immediately. I heard the change in the room before I saw it, a small shift in the air, the way a space adjusts when new people enter, and something unresolved walks in with them. I finished the sentence I was on, and then I let my eyes move toward the entrance. Douglas Holt was wearing a blue button-down shirt that had been pressed with care. He was 73 years old, and he walked the way men do when they have gotten stiff in the years they spent not moving enough, with a deliberateness that read as dignity from a distance. Loretta was beside him in a beige cardigan, her small clutch bag held in both hands. The director of development handed them each a program and said something warm that made my mother nod. Then my father looked down at the program. I watched him read it. I watched his lips stop moving. I watched him look up at the wall. The letters were large and clear. There was no misreading them. The Vivienne Holt Nursing Wing. There was a pause, 3 seconds, maybe 4, and then Loretta reached for his arm and her hand was shaking. I returned to my notes. My voice did not change. I spoke for 18 minutes. I spoke about what it means to come from a place that told you your ambitions were disproportionate to what you were worth, and to return to that place not with anger, but with something more useful. I spoke about the nurses who would work in a swing, the ones who had gotten up early and stayed late and worked double shifts and studied in parking lots and chosen this profession because something deep in them recognized it as a calling, not a compromise. I spoke about the communities in Appalachia that had been quietly abandoned by systems that were supposed to serve them, and about what it means to reinvest in a place that once told you it had nothing left to give you. I did not name my parents. I did not gesture toward them. I did not need to. The room was doing that work for me. When I finished, the nursing staff along the far wall applauded first. They came off the wall with an energy that moved through the room like something physical, and then the full atrium followed. The mayor stood. I thanked him. I thanked the hospital board. I thanked the foundation's directors. Then the CEO stepped to the podium. He introduced me by my full professional title: founder of Holt Consulting Group, chair of the Holt Family Foundation. And then he paused, the way people pause when they want a room to absorb a number, and he said that Vivienne Holt was the single largest individual donor in Raleigh General Hospital's 112-year history. I heard my mother make a sound. I did not look. The reception followed in the atrium. The nursing staff moved through with small plates of food. The mayor shook my hand and said something kind about the community. Free Foundation board members stopped me near the window. I was speaking with the hospital's chief nursing officer when I became aware, in the way you become aware of weather, that my parents were approximately 10 feet to my left. They had not moved much since arriving. Douglas was standing with his program held in both hands, folded once along the center crease. He was not speaking to anyone. I finished my conversation. I excused myself. I crossed the 10 feet. My mother reached for me first. Her hands came up automatically, the way hands do when something long unresolved finally has a surface to touch. And I let her hold my arm for a moment, briefly. I looked at my father. He looked at me. 22 years of a particular silence lived in that moment, and neither of us tried to speak over it. I extended my hand. He took it. "I'm glad you could come," I said. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He nodded. That was the end of the ceremony, as far as I was concerned. 3 days later, at 9:47 on a Tuesday evening, my phone rang. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 2 minutes and 14 seconds long. He said that he had always known I had it in him, and he caught himself and corrected it. He meant in me, he said. He said he had been hard on me because that was how he was raised, that his father had been harder, that he had thought toughness was what prepared you. He said he hoped I knew he was proud. His voice toward the end had a texture I had never heard in it before. He did not ask me to call back. He just said he hoped I was well and that the ceremony had been something to see. I listened to it once, all the way through, standing in my kitchen with the phone in my hand. I did not call back that night. I did not call back that week. 6 weeks later, on a Sunday morning in late July, I called him from the back porch of my house with a cup of coffee, and I spoke with him for 22 minutes. I was warm. I was unhurried. I told him about the Foundation's next project, a clinic in McDowell County that would serve a community without a primary care physician within 40 miles. He listened. He asked one question about the funding structure. I answered it plainly. Before we hung up, he said quietly that he was sorry about the money. He said it once without elaboration. I said, "I know, Dad." And then we said goodbye in the ordinary way of people who are learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to occupy the same world. I have thought many times about what I would say to the girl sitting on that curb in the parking lot of the Mountain Dew Diner in February of 2003. She is 22 years old, and her work apron is still tied around her waist, and she has just learned from a stranger that her father chose a boat over her future. I think I would sit down beside her. I think I would not say much. I think I would tell her that the $6,400 she did not receive was the most important thing that ever happened to her, not because the deprivation was good, but because what she built in its absence was entirely, completely, unreachably hers. No one could take credit for it. No one could claim they believed in her from the beginning. There was no boat large enough to carry the weight of what that decision eventually cost him, not in money. In the far more permanent currency of having been wrong about his daughter, publicly, finally, and in brass. I did not build the Vivienne Holt nursing wing to prove something to my father. I want to be precise about that. I built it because rural communities in Appalachia needed it. I built it because the nurses who would work there deserved infrastructure worthy of their work. I built it because when I was a 22-year-old girl in a 4-bedroom house on Crestview Drive in Beckley, West Virginia, the one thing I knew without ambiguity was that I wanted to take care of people. And I have spent 22 years finding larger and more structural ways to do exactly that. The fact that the building bears my name 8 minutes from the house where I was told my ambition was a waste of good money. That is not the point of the story. It is simply the shape the story took. My father's limitations were never a measure of my ceiling. They were just the floor I had to build up from. He gave me a bus pass when he meant to give me a road, and I built the highway myself. And so I want to ask you something, and I want you to take a moment with it before you answer. If the person who refused to invest in you, who withdrew their belief before you had a chance to prove it, walked into the room on the day the whole room was applauding you, and they looked at the wall and they saw your name on it, what would you have said to them? Not what you wish you had said in anger years ago. What would the version of you who has already built it, who is already standing calm at the podium, who no longer needs anything from them, what would that version of you say? Leave your answer below. I read every single one.